Negotiation is a dialogue between two or more people or parties intended to reach an understanding, resolve point of difference, or gain advantage in outcome of dialogue, to produce an agreement upon courses of action, to bargain for individual or collective advantage, to craft outcomes to satisfy various interests of two people or parties involved in the negotiation process. Negotiation is a process where each party involved in negotiating tries to gain an advantage for themselves. By the end of the process, negotiation is intended to aim at compromise. Negotiation occurs in business, non-profit organizations, and government branches, legal proceedings among nations, and in personal situations such as marriage, divorce, parenting, and everyday life. In organizational behavior, we can define negotiation, a process in which two or more parties exchange goods or services and attempt to agree upon the exchange rate for them. We use the terms negotiation and bargaining interchangeably. Negotiation permits the interactions of almost everyone in groups and organizations. For example, labor bargains with management. Not so obvious. However, managers negotiate with employees, peers, and bosses. Salespeople negotiate with customers. Purchasing agents negotiate with suppliers. A worker agrees to answer a colleague phone for a few minutes in exchange for some past or future benefit. In negotiation theory, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, abbreviated as BATNA, is the course of action that will be taken by a party if the current negotiations fail and agreement cannot be reached. BATNA is the key focus and the driving force behind a successful negotiator. A party should generally not accept a worse resolution than its BATNA. Care should be taken, however, to ensure that deals are accurately valued, taking into account all considerations such as relationship, value, time value of money, and the likelihood that the other party will live up to their side of the bargain. These other considerations are often difficult to value, since they are frequently based on uncertain or qualitative considerations, rather than easily measurable and quantifiable factors. The BATNA is often seen by negotiators not as a safety net, but rather as a point of leverage in negotiations. Although a negotiator's alternative option should in theory be straightforward to evaluate, the effort to understand which alternative represents a party's BATNA is often not invested. Options need to be real and actionable to be part or to be value. However, without the investment of time, options will be frequently be included that fail on one of these criteria. Most managers overestimate their BATNA, simultaneously investing too little time into researching their real options. This can result in poor or faulty decision making and negotiating outcomes. Negotiators also need to be aware of other negotiators' BATNA and to identify how it compares to what they are offering. For our information, BATNA was developed by negotiation researchers Roger Fisher and William Ury of Harvard Program on Negotiation, or PON, in their series of books on principled negotiation that started with Getting to Yes, at unwittingly duplicating a game theory concept pioneered by Nobel laureate John Forbes Nash decades earlier in his early undergraduate research. BATNA is the lowest acceptable value to an individual for a negotiated agreement. The two negotiating approaches that are generally practiced in organizations are distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining. Distributive bargaining leads to win-lose situations, whereas integrative bargaining leads to win-win situations. Negotiation strategies have gained a significant amount of attention from management practitioners owing to their conflict resolving attribute. There are two main approaches to negotiations based on the stance adopted by the negotiating parties: distributive and integrative. To choose the most applicable strategy for a particular situation, it's important to understand the difference between distributive and integrative negotiation strategies. Let us now contrast distributive and integrative negotiation. Distributive negotiation ends up in a win-lose situation, where some parties stand at an advantage and others lose out. On the other hand, integrative negotiation creates a win-win situation for all parties. Distributive negotiation is competitive in nature and requires that every party views every other party as a competitor, while integrative negotiation is collaborative in nature and all the parties negotiate on friendly terms, acting as allies to one another. Integrative negotiation works as a conflict management tool, whereas distributive negotiation intensifies the conflicts further. In distributive negotiation, every negotiator focuses on meeting his personal interests, regardless of the loss the others may have to face. In contrast, integrative negotiation focuses on mutual interests of all the parties and thus comes up with constructive solution that will be beneficial for all. Bargaining or haggling is a type of negotiation in which the buyer and seller of a good or service dispute the price which will be paid and the exact nature of the transaction that will take place, and eventually come to an agreement. Bargaining is an alternative pricing strategy to fixed price. By staking out the bargaining zone, negotiation can be identified settlement and can determine and negotiate the resistance of each parties. The most widely cited example of distributed bargaining is in labor management negotiations over wages. Let's take an example. A company selects already an prospect employee and now in the process of the asking salary. The company can offer for now 9,500 pesos as a basic salary, but the applicant demand is 10,000 pesos. The company doesn't want to lose the applicant and will consider looking for ways in how to get this applicant by explaining to the applicant the benefits that he will receive and the bonuses and salary upgrade once the employee performs well after evaluation in a year. Why is distributive bargaining important? Distributive bargaining is important because there are some disputes that cannot be solved in any other way. They are inherently zero-sum. If the stakes are high, such conflicts can be very resistant to resolution. For example, if budgets in a government agency must be cut 30% and the people's jobs are at stake, a decision about what to cut is likely to be very difficult. If the cuts are small enough that the impact on employees will be minor, however, such distributive decisions can be made more easily. Even in cooperative negotiations, distributive bargaining will come into play. Distributive bargaining and integrative bargaining are not mutually exclusive negotiation strategies. In this slide, we discuss the simplified model of the negotiation process. Preparation and planning. At this stage, we do the homework. We evaluate what's the nature of the conflict, what's the history leading up to this negotiation, who's involved, and what are their perceptions of the conflict, and what we need from the negotiation, and what are our goals. Also, we prepare an assessment on what we think the other party to our negotiation. When we can anticipate the opponent's position, and we must equip to counter his or her arguments with the facts and figures that support our position. We need to determine the best alternative to a negotiated agreement as we discuss the so-called BATNA. BATNA will determine the lowest value acceptable to us for the negotiated agreement. The next is the definition of ground rules. In this process, we determine where it will take place, who will do the negotiating, what is the time constraints, if any, it will apply. And during this phase, the parties will also exchange their initial proposal or demands. The next is clarification and justification. This is the confrontational stage. We might want to provide the other party with any documentation that helps to support their claims and their position, and also our position. The next one is the bargaining and problem solving. The essence of the negotiation process is the actual give and take in trying to hash out an agreement. Concessions will be undoubtedly need to be made by both parties. The last one is the closure and implementation, in which negotiations will require hammering out the specifics in a formal contract. For most cases, closure of the negotiation process is nothing more than formal than a handshake. Let us now discuss issues in negotiation. The first one is the role of personality traits in negotiation. There is a question: can we predict an opponent's negotiating tactics if we know something about his or her personality? Well, the answer is the evidence says no. Overall assessments of the personality negotiation relationship finds that personality traits have no significant direct effect on either the bargaining process or negotiation outcomes. Second is the gender differences in negotiations. Men and women do not negotiate differently. A popular stereotype is that women are more cooperative, pleasant, and relationship-oriented in negotiations than are men. Well, the evidence doesn't support this. Comparisons between experienced male and female managers find women are the following: neither worse nor better negotiators, neither more cooperative nor open to the other, and neither more nor less persuasive nor threatening than are men. The belief that women are nicer is probably due to confusing gender and the lack of power typically held by women. Low-power managers, regardless of gender, attempt to placate their opponents and to use softly persuasive tactics rather than direct confrontation and threats. Women's attitudes towards negotiation and toward themselves appear to be different from men's. Managerial woman demonstrates less confidence in anticipation of negotiating and are less satisfied with their performance despite achieving similar outcomes as men. Women may unduly penalize themselves by failing to engage in negotiation when such action would be in their best interest. Third party negotiations. When individuals or group representatives reach a stalemate and are unable to resolve their differences through direct negotiations, they may turn to a third party. A mediator is a neutral third party who facilitates a negotiated solution by using reasoning and persuasion, suggesting alternatives and the like. They are widely used in labor management negotiations and civil courts disputes. Also mediator, their settlement rate is approximately 60%, with negotiator satisfaction at about 75%. But the key to success, the conflicting parties must be motivated to bargain and to resolve their conflict. Intensity can't be too high, and the mediator must be perceived as a neutral and non-coercive. Next is the arbitrator. An arbitrator is a third party with the authority to dictate an agreement. It can be voluntary or requested or compulsory, forced on parties by law or contract. The authority of the arbitrator varies according to the rules set by the negotiators. Arbitrator might be limited to choosing one of the negotiator's last offers or to suggesting an agreement point that is non-binding or free to choose and make any judgment. The big plus of arbitration over mediation is it always results in a settlement. Any negative depends on how heavy-handed the arbitrator appears. The next one is conciliator. A conciliator is a trusted third party who provides an informal communication link among parties. Conciliation is used extensively in international, labor, family, and community disputes. Comparing its effectiveness to mediation has proven difficult. Conciliators engage in fact-finding, interpreting messages, and persuading disputants to develop agreements. Lastly is a consultant. A consultant is a skilled and impartial third party who attempts to facilitate problem solving through communication and analysis, aided by his or her knowledge of conflict management. It contrasts the previous roles. The consultant's role is to improve relations between the conflicting parties so that they can reach a settlement themselves. This approach has a longer-term focus to build new and positive perceptions and attitudes between the conflicting parties. Why U.S. managers might have trouble in cross-cultural negotiations. Italians, Germans, and French don't soften up executives with praise before they criticize, but Americans do. And so many Europeans, this seems manipulative. Israelis, accustomed to fast-paced meetings, have no patience for American talk. British executives often complain that their U.S. counterparts chatter too much. Indian executives are used to interrupting one another. When Americans listen without asking for clarification or posing questions, Indians can feel the Americans aren't paying attention. American often mixes their business and personal lives. They think nothing, for instance, about asking a colleague a question like, "How was your weekend?" In many cultures, such questions seen as intrusive because business and private lives are totally compartmentalized.